Chris Hedges is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who was a foreign correspondent for 15 years for the New York Times, where he served as the Middle East bureau chief and Balkan bureau chief for the paper. He is the host of Emmy Award-nominated RT America show On Contact, and his most recent book is America, the Farewell Tour, and that came out in 2019. And Margaret Kimberley is a co-founder and editor and senior columnist for Black Agenda Report. She is the author of the book, and it's a new book, and we just recently had her on our show, so guys, check out that interview, Prejudential, Black America and the President, so you can get a much more specific view of that on our page. And Killing Trayvon's, an anthology of American violence. She also wrote something in defense of Julian Assange. She is an administrative committee member of the United National Anti-War Coalition and the Coordinating Committee of Black Alliance for Peace. She is a board member for the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation. So welcome, Margaret and Chris. It's so nice to have you guys here. I'm very excited about this. Chris, big fan. So I'm so happy that you agreed to do this. And Margaret, it's so good to see you again. Welcome back. Wait, we don't hear you.
And apologies, I was in the wrong window, so I didn't see everyone. Hi.
You were in the wrong window. All right, Margaret is having technical problems. It's okay. We've all had them. So Katie, you had some stuff set up that you wanted to do with this?
Oh yes. Hi, Chris. Nice to see you again.
Hey.
Yeah.
Hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
I can hear you now. Great.
Okay.
I had tech issues too. I think it was the NSA coming for all of us. But yeah, I just wanted to ask both of you about what got you interested in this story and why you think it's an important story, and also why you think the media is so afraid of touching it.
I'll let Margaret go.
Well, it was clear to me that Assange was considered an enemy of politicians and even of the corporate media, even though he himself is a journalist, because he doesn't play by the rules. He exposed what powerful people did not want to expose. And there's so many so-called journalists who are complicit, so they didn't like that at all, putting the rest of them to shame, doing what the rest of them should have been doing. And he made a lot of enemies. The release of the Iraq war logs was, everyone could see what the U.S., and yesterday was the anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, we have to point out, could see the crimes that the U.S. was committing in this country that we were told we were saving by bombing them or whatever. And that is how he came to be an enemy. In the 2016 election, he played a role in embarrassing Hillary Clinton. All he did, because someone leaked to him, that's a whole other story, information, he was able to embarrass her and tell the truth about her. And when she lost, it was easy for them to make him an enemy again and to make him someone that people would hate. And the rape charge, by the way, he was never charged with rape in Sweden, ever. It was the United States pressuring Sweden to make it look like he was a rapist. So he's a rapist who brought us Donald Trump. Well, so that is how he came to be so heartily disliked, and why I was always a defender of his cause. I have always defended people who tell us what we need to be told, and that means making enemies of the powerful.
So Margaret raises the Iraqi war logs. They came out in October 2010. These were the material, including videos, images of the gunning down of 2 Reuters journalists and 10 other unarmed civilians as so-called collateral murder video. It exposed the torture of Iraqi prisoners. It exposed the covering up of thousands of civilian deaths, including the killing of the documentation of the killing of over 700 civilians who had approached too closely to U.S. checkpoints. And immediately after the release of the Iraqi war logs, the great civil rights attorney Michael Ratner, along with another towering civil rights attorney, Len Weinglass, who had defended Daniel Ellsberg in the Pentagon Papers case, flew to London and asked for a meeting with Julian. Now, Julian had just come back from Sweden, and he'd been in Sweden because he was attempting to create a legal framework to protect WikiLeaks servers in Sweden. As soon as he got to Stockholm, or shortly after he got to Stockholm, all of his personal bank cards were blocked. So he had no access to funds at all. And he was dependent on supporters. 2 of them were women with whom he had consensual sex. As he was preparing to leave, the Swedish media announced that he was wanted for questioning about allegations of rape, which neither of the women ever charged. They never accused him of rape. They wanted him to take an STD test, and they'd approached the police about asking him to comply. And one of the women, in fact, said that she was railroaded by the police to making a charge. 24 hours later, the chief prosecutor of Stockholm takes over the preliminary investigation. She drops the rape accusation and said that there's no evidence that he committed rape. And so although he's not charged with a crime, Julian canceled his departure. He stayed in Sweden for another 5 weeks to cooperate. They appointed a special prosecutor to investigate the allegations. He was granted permission to leave the country, and then he went to Britain, and that's where Len and Michael Ratner met him. On the way to Britain, he flew to Berlin, and when he arrived in Berlin, 3 of his encrypted laptops with documents detailing war crimes disappeared from his luggage. So Michael and Len pressed Julian for a meeting in London because they immediately saw that the Swedish allegations were a distraction. They had read the police reports. They knew there was no case. What they did know, because especially Michael had been spending decades fighting on behalf of Attica prisoners. He organized all of the attorneys to defend those held in Guantanamo. He knew precisely what the empire was going to do, and that was crucify Julian. And it was he who recommended that Julian not go back to Sweden because he would be extradited. This actually came as a surprise to Julian. And they laid out to him that he would be charged under the Espionage Act, which is the 1917 equivalent of our Foreign Secrets Act. So from the moment that the Iraqi war logs came out, it was clear, and I was very close to Michael and flew to London to visit Julian with Michael. It was very clear that the empire was going to mount a no-holds-barred campaign because Julian, and through his own courage and the courage of Chelsea Manning, had shown a light into the machinery of empire and the war crimes that they had committed. And that, of course, turned out to be sadly prescient. And so I've long been a supporter of Julian and of course know him and understand the severity of his persecution, because it's really an attack on the entire press. I'll just add one more caveat. People talk about The Guardian, El País, Der Spiegel, the New York Times publishing this material. I spent 15 years at the New York Times. The reason they published the material is because they knew it would be published in the alternative press if they turned it down, and they would be exposed as handmaidens of the imperial and the corporate state. And so everybody asks the question, well, how can The Guardian, how can the New York Times, how can they turn on Julian, which they did immediately after they published the material that was shared with them? Well, it's because they always hated him from the beginning. And it's traditionally, if you look closely, it's always been the alternative media throughout history that has shamed the corporate press into doing their job. So they had no choice. They knew that they would be exposed as bankrupt if they somehow refused to publish that information. And yet, on the other hand, from the beginning, there was a deep animus towards Julian, which is why, of course, they've refused to defend him. Although the legal precedent that would be set if he's brought back, Julian's not an American citizen. WikiLeaks is not a U.S.-based publication. The legal precedent that would be set would be devastating for what's left of our very anemic press.
Do you think it's rational that other journalists don't care because they really won't be doing, I mean, cowardly, but also rational because they wouldn't be doing the type of journalism that was published by WikiLeaks? So, on its face, it seems like, what are they doing? This can be used against them, but maybe they are right because they know they wouldn't ever do the type of journalism that would get them in trouble.
I think so. They don't have any intention of doing what the work Julian did. And most of them, so many of them just want access. So the last thing they want to do is make the government angry with them. So they, in order to stay in their good graces, never defy them. And they certainly wouldn't do anything to create as much trouble in their lives as Julian has had in his. So they're more like, scribes or courtiers or something like that. So no, they don't care about Julian. They are very tightly allied with the people they're supposed to be reporting on.
Right.
Yeah, Margaret makes a good point. The way you rise within these news organizations is to act as a stenographer to power. That's what most Washington reporters are. I can't speak to the configurations of the New York Times now. It's certainly a far weaker news organization than when I was there. But there were people within the organization who attempted to challenge positions of power. And I felt that as a foreign correspondent reporting from Gaza, or reporting from the war in the former Yugoslavia, or during the Reagan administration when I covered the war in El Salvador and the war in Nicaragua. But you weren't just battling Washington. You were actually battling, as Margaret points out, the predominance of those journalists who make their living doing lunch with peoples of power. So there was always an internal force within these news organizations that conspired against those of us who were attempting to report off the ground the reality of what was happening. And if you're just insistent, if you don't conform, eventually you become a management problem and you get pushed out, as I was pushed out. But there's a whole list of people. Cy Hirsch did a long investigation on Gulf and Western when he was at the New York Times, and the chairman of Gulf and Western, which was completely mobbed up, was inviting the publisher to private screenings at his lavish home, and that there was a version of it. It was published down. It was so watered down and neutered that it didn't say anything, and that's when Hirsch left the paper. Same thing with Sidney Schanberg, also a friend of mine. Sidney, who was made famous in the movie The Killing Fields, comes back and he starts writing about gentrification in New York City and how rent laws are being overwritten so people can be middle class, working class can be pushed out. And this angers the large real estate developers who, again, have close personal relationships with the publisher. And Sidney Schanberg ends up at the Village Voice and then later at Newsday. So Margaret is exactly right. It's a way to achieve prominence. Look at Thomas Friedman or any of these figures. The way to achieve prominence is to act as a stenographer to power. And within those organizations, if you attempt to challenge that ethos, you can maybe do it once or twice or a few times. But if you try consistently to do that throughout your career, then you are always pushed out. Many people remember the story of Gary Webb. Gary Webb, a good investigative reporter, had found out that the Contras, I was in Nicaragua at the time, so I know that it's true, the CIA was enabling the Contras, who were Reagan's I mean, these guys were just old somocistas, murderers, rapists. I mean, they're just those
Torturers.
scum of the scum, torturers, of course, and killers on top of it. So they were, to fund the Contras, they were allowing them, they would send down weapons and arms in C-130 transport planes through private companies like Air America, and then they would all go back filled with cocaine that would be sold on the streets of Oakland and other cities, creating the whole crack epidemic, or certainly one of the major forces behind the crack epidemic. And when that came out, I believe he published it in one of the San Francisco papers, but in a California paper. They went after Gary Webb, but it's interesting that the mainstream media, the Washington Post, the New York Times, they were used to discredit Webb. And they never did any reporting. They just went to official sources. Webb, of course, ended up being completely blacklisted within the journalistic community and committed suicide. So I think, Margaret makes a very valid point that to achieve prominence within this system, one is a courtier. And if you attempt to work within the system and you're not a courtier, then you not only attacked by the ruling and power elites, but you're attacked by people within those media institutions. I mean, I used to say that the real motto of the New York Times is "Do not significantly alienate those on whom we depend for money and access."
Yeah, I think it's interesting that, and I mean, we see this prominently since 9/11, that there's no more like foreign correspondents. They called everybody home. Now they're just, right. So even people that were talking heads when I was growing up, the people that were doing the news, they were actually reporters at one point. Those were actually people that went out and investigated stories and reported their stories. And now there's not even a facade of foreign correspondence of any real substance. It's just like, we're just supposed to believe it because they say so. And they don't even I don't see anybody ever on the ground anymore. Is there? I mean, is that something that even exists?
No, they've closed all the bureaus because it's again, with the contraction of the media industry, it's all become about profit, and foreign running, especially if you're covering a war, it's extremely expensive. I mean, my budget the first year I covered the war in the former Yugoslavia, and this is excluding salaries and we had 3 reporters and 2 photographers and translators and drivers and everything else, not to mention armored vehicles, which were $100,000 a pop, was $600,000. That doesn't happen now. And so, yes, it's all become gossip. So not only has the world outside the borders of the United States been rendered invisible, but the working class and the working poor in this country have been rendered invisible. And so it's all, it's like people sitting around Versailles or the Forbidden City gossiping endlessly about, what the elites are doing and who's in and who's out, kind of like working at the New York Times, much the same kind of ethos. And meanwhile, those people who are suffering either from the crimes committed by the empire or the crimes committed by the ruling elites internally have no voice. They don't exist because advertisers don't want their stories told, so they're not told.
Yeah. So, Margaret, I just wanted to ask you, when Chris mentions Versailles, I can't help but thinking of Kristen Sinema walking into to place her vote with the cake. She had actually brought cake with her, as if somehow that's cute. And so, I, of course, was thinking, well, then maybe we should get a guillotine, I mean, if she's going to have cake, then, maybe we should. So, yeah, well, they already hate me. So, well, I just want to know,
not against you. Yeah.
Oh, not against. Yeah. No, but first of all, there are people building guillotines, like I think in front of like Jeff Bezos' house and stuff like that. But, I wouldn't be walking around voting no against working people and putting out cake. I don't think that's a smart move. So I was wondering, what you thought about what your thoughts were.
Well, it was interesting to me that it was so blatant. I mean, that is the way members of the Senate feel about working people. That's how they feel about 99% of the country. Yeah. Complete disregard, hatred even. But we're at a point now where they don't even bother to hide the disdain that they have, and it's easy for them to have it because they don't get elected based on what ordinary working people need. They get elected if they can raise millions of dollars. Senators have to raise 30 million, 40, depending on the state, up to $40 million in order to be able to have a credible run for office. And that means they're not going to me or any of my neighbors. They are going to, Chris just talked about the real estate developers. They're a huge force in politics here in New York, and I guess throughout the country. So we have this phony democracy where we're told we have a voice when we don't. People get to be senators because they don't listen to the people, because they promise that they're not going to listen to the people. What did Biden say at his the fundraiser with the fat cats? Nothing will fundamentally change. And that is what they all spend their time doing in order to make sure that they get into office. We've seen these studies which confirm what we've already observed, that you don't get what you want, even if the person who you like or the party who you support wins. You still don't get what you want because the system is built to accommodate others and not you.
I think that's the one campaign promise he's actually kept. And of course, that was not made publicly. So got to congratulate him on that. Yeah.
Well, that's one reporter who did a good job by whoever, I can't even remember who it was, somebody for Bloomberg, I believe, who told us that story. That was significant.
So something I was thinking about when we had the last panel on, and even now, is that, we often see this and Margaret, we talked about this on our show, this like whitewashing of our history. Mm-hmm. And I feel like what we're seeing with the media and how the media is covering things.
By the way,
yes, there's Margaret's book. Yes, she knows I
Black
kindled.
America
Katie's better than me.
Margaret Kimberley. And I have your books, Chris, but upstate, not here.
Okay, see, Katie's living in two addresses now.
I can't say, yeah.
But what I'm thinking is, like, we're sitting here and we're watching it in live time. So the failure of the media to accurately and systemically portray real facts is what leads to us not having an accurate historical record. So it's like we're actually not only suffering from the whitewashing of the history in the past, but we're watching it live time right now because it's basically lies of omission. Even if somebody were to say they're not flat out making things up, they're just not even covering it. No. And so this is what we're going to see, 100 years down the road is, will anybody even remember Julian Assange? And, this is exactly how that happens, that we end up with a history that does not reflect actual facts.
Yeah, I just want to hold up another book. Chris and I are both contributors to In Defense of Julian Assange. So if people want to know Julian's story, you should get that book.
Definitely.
But yeah, stuff, the truth has just disappeared, or it's turned on its head. I mean, Julian Assange is a living embodiment of that. I mean, if you think about it, I've often say to myself, many people want to be well informed. They really do. So they think if I read the New York Times, if I listen to NPR, if I watch CNN, MSNBC, I know what's happening in the world, except they don't. What they want you to believe. And so you think that China's your enemy, you think Putin's a killer, you think all kinds of ridiculous things that are just fantasy. But they're the fantasies of people who want to keep you under control. So Hillary Clinton didn't lose because she ran a bad campaign. She didn't lose because she wanted Donald Trump to be her competition because she thought he'd be easiest to beat. No, she lost because of the Russians, and she lost because of Julian Assange. And so this man who ordinarily would have support amongst some of the liberal class is instead hated and disdained, and people don't even, and most people I talk to don't even know why they're trying to extradite him. They think it has to do with this, alleged collusion with Russia, not that he revealed something that the U.S. didn't want revealed, and that there's an espionage act from the days of Woodrow Wilson, and Barack Obama used it more than anybody else to put people behind bars. And they have no idea that the United States is claiming it has the right to snatch anybody anywhere on the planet and put them on trial in Washington.
And even Obama, with his, Espionage Act trigger happiness, didn't go after Assange. So it's really rich watching these same liberals who praise Obama as being a constitutional lawyer and a nuanced thinker, and somehow they're siding with Trump and Pompeo on this issue. They're siding with Cheeto Mussolini, unprecedented existential threat guy.
Yeah, and Biden, who's copying everything Trump did when it comes to
right. And Biden is doing that. Right. Biden himself is siding with Pompeo and Trump, not with the guy who was president. What do you call him? A clean and articulate African American?
Yeah, whatever. Whatever.
He's the acceptable level of black. He was the acceptable presentation of black because it has to conform.
And that racist statement helped get him chosen as his running mate, which is even better.
Yeah.
Are there any? We interviewed Daniel Ellsberg on Useful Idiots the other day. Matt Taibbi and I did, and it was really fascinating because he talked about how people like to point to him now as a good whistleblower, so that they can denigrate Manning, Snowden, and Assange. In contrast. And it's true. People say disgusting things about Manning, Snowden, and Assange, and they claim to think that Ellsberg is a hero, yet their hero vehemently disagrees with them, which reminds me of what you guys were just saying about history. It's great. Maybe in how, maybe they'll have to go through Ellsberg time, decades later, maybe they'll be considered whistleblowers, so someone else can be vilified.
Well, Ellsberg suffered from the same kind of character assassination that is visited now upon Julian and Chelsea and Ed Snowden and Jeremy Hammond and Aaron Schwartz and all these other courageous people that have attempted to shine a light into the inner workings of power. And of course, Dan remembers that. Look, I mean, the whole, Margaret can speak to this better than I can, but the whole mythology around Martin Luther King. I grew up in a small white farm town. Martin Luther King was one of the most hated men in America at the time he died. I mean, even his approval ratings among African Americans, I think, Margaret, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it was about 50% or something.
I'd say it was higher for us.
But it wasn't a more majoritarian. I mean, they'd so successfully demonized him throughout the country. And we forget the power of black propaganda. It's quite effective. And of course, that what makes Michael Ratner so prescient is that he knew precisely what was coming the moment the Iraqi warlogs were met. You can read all that. He tells the whole story in his memoir, Moving the Bar. So of course Dan knows, but we sanitize these historical figures. We freeze them in time, as we have with King and his "I Have a Dream" speech, and in essence neuter them of their radicalism, neuter them of their courage, and then erase. We create this historical amnesia. So, I mean, boy, the FBI was trying to drive King to suicide. Yeah. The FBI was at carrying out assassinations of black leaders like Fred Hampton and others. So, the history is, the version of history that we study is one that is written and supported that justifies or speaks to the supposed virtues of the ruling elites. And counter historians like Howard Zinn, or as he was, driven out of their academic posts or never given academic posts.
Yeah, that's what concerns me the most. That's what concerns me the most, is that this is going to keep getting perpetrated and that we're still not teaching proper history right now. We're not teaching proper history right now. I mean, Zinn should be required reading. I feel like we're not correcting it from the early ages where it really matters. We're not teaching it properly in the beginning, and I think that is a real problem.
Yeah, well, Chris just made mention of King's "I Have a Dream" speech, which, I think most people think he only gave one speech.
Right.
They don't talk about him breaking with Lyndon Johnson over the Vietnam War a year to the day before he was killed. And while he did have near universal support from Black people, that decision that he made, he broke with some of his colleagues, even his own father. They were like, "You can't piss off Lyndon Johnson. What are you thinking?"
I know that.
One of the more courageous acts of his life, and it's been disappeared. I call King's birthday the "Let's pretend we liked King when he was alive" day, because if you look at what the New York Times and the Washington Post said about him when he made that decision, it's nothing like what they say about him today. So, but I wanted to make another point about the corporate media. They're trying to silence us and censor us and deplatform us because they know there's a group of people who aren't going to shut up. There are a group of people who are not going to change what they say, who will tell the truth about Julian Assange, they and others. So that is why, and I know there's great disagreement, but I think it is a huge mistake for people on the left to think it's okay for Trump to have been deplatformed. That is my position. So their goal is to deplatform us all, and for once and for all, get rid of anybody who isn't going to go along with the official narrative.
It always harms the
I was
left.
against deplatforming Alex Jones, and he's a buffoon.
I was too.
Right.
Yeah.
Let a buffoon be a buffoon. I mean, the best way to counteract the information is with accurate information, not by deplatforming. So we just need to be louder.
And there are things that have to be done that we can work towards in terms of media. And, obviously the corporate media makes it hard, and various models make it hard to even get seen or heard. But yeah, we can't just let content moderation and censorship happen because we think that the people who they're targeting are the bad guys. As if they, have some moral compass, as if like Silicon Valley is interested in the well-being and the best interest of most citizens. But just so people know, so Martin Luther King gave this speech where he basically condemned, because people probably don't know, a lot of viewers, where he condemned the war in Vietnam and talked about the triple evils of racism, imperialism, and capitalism. Yep. And was, it was so funny to see the headlines and the articles about him where they're like, this isn't really your thing. Your thing is civil rights. You should focus on that and not get into the economics of it. But Daniel Ellsberg also shared that he said he's very conscious of the fact that people are celebrating him in order to denigrate the current, more recent whistleblowers. And he also said that Malcolm Gladwell in the New Yorker had written this piece that was based exactly on that premise and tried to contrast Ellsberg with Snowden in particular. And Daniel Ellsberg wrote a letter, to the New Yorker. And presumably you would think that the New Yorker would publish a letter written by Daniel Ellsberg in response to a piece about Daniel Ellsberg. This isn't some anonymous, obscure figure. This is Daniel Ellsberg. And they didn't publish it. And Malcolm Gladwell, the genius that he is, and the New Yorker, the rigorous magazine that it is, he said that Ellsberg had served in North Korea. He'd been in North Carolina, so the first word was
easy confusion.
Yeah.
Easy confusion. North Korea, North Carolina. Yeah.
So it just.
Yeah. Well, this answers your previous question about why people like him don't defend Assange.
Right.
That's it. They don't want to be courageous, and they will tell lies. And and Ellsberg, people see him through this, rose-colored glasses. He was targeted by Nixon, who liberals didn't like. So. Right. but the attempt to crush whistleblowers was an Obama thing. So are you going to talk about, say anything negative about Obama? No, most liberals will not. That's a bigger issue of the country moving further and further to the right since that time.
Yeah. So let me ask you, especially Chris, like for people that are watching this, and there are people, and I do believe what Margaret said, that most people want to try to be informed. And I even know people, they think they're informed. They get up, they watch their CNN, they know everything that's going on. So like, what would you suggest would be the better source of information for just regular people that, I mean, like I spend 3 to 4 hours a day, like researching. Most people don't have that. Most people are not going to be able to do that and dig everything up. So what would be your recommendation for people to get a decent news that is available?
Well, the problem is most people are passive consumers of what they're fed. And that's why the corporate media has made war on alternative press outlets through algorithms. You saw very overt censorship by the media platforms, Google, YouTube, Twitter, during the Biden campaign, shutting out the New York Post from its own Twitter account after it published the revelations on Hunter Biden's laptop, the use of derogatory terms to talk about information like the Podesta emails that were released by WikiLeaks. John Podesta had been Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, calling it misinformation. It's not misinformation. Nobody's ever questioned the veracity of those emails. And so we've created a system where if you don't go searching for credible forms of information and you rely on the mainstream media outlets, then you're going to get fed garbage of one form of another, whether it's Rachel Maddow spinning, lurid tales of Russia, CNN does the same thing, or Fox demonizing just about everybody who isn't white, male, and American. That's the problem. So I think, most consumers of news, I look at particular bylines, not at news organizations. So I think both Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald have done tremendous work on the media. I admire them for it. I don't know how they can find the patience and sanity to sift through all that stuff, but they do, and they're very important. They're important on other issues too, but they're especially important on that issue. I read Amir Haas, Danny Rubenstein in Aretz, the Israeli newspaper, for reporting on the Palestinians. I mean, the irony being that these are Israeli Jews. I think Aretz probably, for a mainstream publication, the Electronic Intifada is another important source of information. Margaret writes for Black Agenda Report, another important publication. So I look for Margaret stuff. So I look more for people. I mean, I'm in the business, so but that's always
right. So people don't know.
Yeah, I
people
know, but I'm saying
know.
that if you're not proactive, it's now almost impossible to get decent information about what's happening. Al Jazeera is a very important outlet, certainly on the Middle East. But you're right that you've got to, if you passively consume what's fed to you by the corporate monolith, it's worse than the lie of omission. That used to be the old lie. Now it's just outright fabrication. The whole notion that Russia is responsible for the election of Trump in 2016, and nobody mentions the country that actually interferes massively in our electoral process, and that's Israel. Flying hundreds of members of Congress on junkets, donating money far above the campaign limits, mounting fierce campaigns against student activists, college students who support the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, as I do. The media landscape has constricted. I mean, in my own career, going back to the early 80s, I've watched the walls close in. And then, of course, voices like mine have been completely marginalized because of that. And so I'm very worried about, and Biden's calling for new domestic terrorism laws. They, are there's an open campaign on the part of establishment Democrats calling for people to be removed from the media landscape, assaults against Substack, where Matt and Glenn and other people write. And so I think that, what we're seeing is a shift where voices like Margaret's and mine were marginalized, but because the ruling elites really have no credibility anymore, and the ruling ideology of neoliberalism has been uncovered as a bankrupt, just a fig leaf for theft on the part of oligarchic elite. I recommend David Harvey's great book, A Brief History of Neoliberalism. It never made economic sense ever. I mean, it was based on outliers like Hayek or this third-rate novelist Ayn Rand, but it was never meant to. It was an ideological cover for pillage. White supremacy functions the same way. So, and because there's no answer, because the credibility has collapsed, then voices that critique these centers of power become more dangerous. And even though they're already marginalized, there are calls by establishment and the New York Times and MSNBC and the Washington Post. They cheerlead this because the whole idea is to direct readers or viewers back to these mainstream outlets that have seen their own credibility fall tremendously because of their complicity in, a slew of lies, whether it's this ridiculous caliphate. I mean, this podcast, The Caliphate, where I spent 7 years in the Middle East. I mean, from the moment I heard it, it was clear it was a fake. It was just kind of, audio snuff porn for, demonization of Muslims. Black Agenda Report, like I wrote for Truthdig till we all went on strike and then we got fired. But that, those outlets were attacked several years ago by this anonymous website called Prop or Not, Propaganda or Not, as being agents of a foreign power. So, I think that we will see this, and with the full complicity of YouTube, Google, these outlets, which are, of course, completely tied to the defense industry and the intelligence industry. What Amazon has, a $600 million contract, I think, with the CIA.
Isn't he making drones? He's making drones.
Is he making drones? Yeah. Okay.
He's making drones. Well, he's got to make the drones deliver the packages. Yeah, exactly. There's going to be drones delivering the packages. So he's the drone guy.
Yeah.
But you're watching, and I think that's why so many of us were so outspoken about Julian from the beginning, because Julian and WikiLeaks were the canary in the coal mine. They were what they went after first. They hardly have stopped there. And they're moving at a very fast pace. And Biden and the Democrats are probably going to be even worse than the Trump administration in terms of shutting down the voices, in particular on the left, because the left calls them out for who they are. And so, therefore, are
it
more
has
dangerous.
gotten worse,
right?
Yeah,
it's definitely going to come from the left, right?
To Chris's point about how they direct people now on Twitter, if you read, and I think people should read Chinese media, it will say Chinese government site. It doesn't say that for the BBC.
CBC,
they get government money. Same thing with YouTube. So they are working overtime to try to discredit, to make sure that, and after Prop or Not, we got, and other sites were, we got fewer eyeballs. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the terminology, but you couldn't find ourselves.
Right, it's impressions.
Yes,
so,
we couldn't find. I would try to look for articles I knew I had written on Google and could not find them. So,
they ran a graph. So after Prop or Not, Truthdig actually did the digital research, and they ran. So they at the beginning of Prop or Not, if I'd written an article on imperialism, probably the same for you, then it would come up if you typed imperialism into Google, and it was a recent article. Right. But the referrals from impressions declined over a 12-month period from over 700,000 to below 200,000, and now they're probably about zero. And of course, one of the major organizations that was attacked by these algorithms was WikiLeaks and Julian. But yes, that's exactly right. That's not even conjecture. We know that's fact.
Yeah, we know it's true. So it takes people, you have to be aware enough to be skeptical in the first place, and then to make the effort. And as Chris said, people are passive consumers. And instead of saying to yourself, wait a minute, this doesn't sound right, let me look for this. And so then if you do know who to follow, if you do know who to follow on social media, you can get some of the truth. But you're talking about people being skeptical, not being passive, knowing or even assuming or thinking they may be lied to. I mean, that's a heavy lift. I hate to say this, for most people. So we're still struggling and doing our best, but they are afraid of even that, and that is why they are censoring. I also want to say one more thing about the corporate media and the issue of Asian hate crimes in the wake of the shooting in Georgia. The New York Times acts as though it has nothing to do with the way China and other Asian countries are perceived. Right. When in fact they talk about China being sneaky, the Uyghur, we could do a separate show about the phoniness of that story. Xi Jinping is a tyrant. There are concentration camps, there's forced labor, all of these things that are lies. And Trump, yes, he talked about the China virus, but the New York Times did pretty much the same thing in their reporting on China and COVID, and not reporting their successes. So they also have played a role in that. I wanted to say that.
Yeah,
before.
I had on my show the other day, the Katie Halper show, not Useful Idiots, but I had on Danny Haifong, your colleague, Margaret, and we looked at the different images from different newspapers, magazines, totally racist tropes of like China looking like the dragon image, ridiculous headlines. And I would just say that with the Substack stuff, it's not just corporate media or the usual suspects who are calling for people to be driven off Substack. You have people who claim to be left. I think they're basically neoliberals who are socially progressive. But saying that people are committing violence, and this is not about like white supremacists. This is about, people like Glenn Greenwald, and just openly calling for people to be removed from platforms, which again, I interviewed Chomsky a couple months ago and asked him about this. And he's like, well, cancel culture has been around forever. It was the McCarthy era. The difference is the left used to oppose it. And I do think that like there are people on the left, it's embarrassing and it's uncomfortable to talk about it, but there are people on the left who have jumped on the bandwagon, whether it's censorship, whether it's not deplatforming. I mean, again, it's very disappointing.
Well, we should stop letting them call themselves leftists.
Yeah, I know, seriously.
But it's about easy moral purity, because it's really easy to go after. There's no cost for going after those targets, and in fact, mainstream society cheers them on largely. There's a cost to go after companies like Goldman Sachs or Raytheon or the security and surveillance state. So I really think a lot of it is about their own self-adulation. Yeah. But I lived in Roxbury when I was in seminary and commuted into Harvard, and that's where I learned to hate liberals. So.
Yeah. Everyone should listen to the last episode.
All those people talking about empowering people they never met.
Right. Through and also empowering people through looking at their own checking their own privilege, making sure that they it's a long story. It's not bias. Particularly new. I mean, so I was at Harvard Divinity School. All these students would go down and pick coffee for a week in Nicaragua and then spend the rest of the semester talking about it, but they wouldn't get on the Green Line and ride 20 minutes out to one of these housing projects where people being warehoused, in appalling conditions. So it's not particularly new. I mean, Chomsky's kind of done the best intellectual deconstruction of liberalism and the liberal class. Yeah.
Well, this has actually inspired me to post my 4-page source list. I have a source list that I've been compiling, and I need to clean it up, and I need to just regularly be posting it and maybe just sort of, trying to encourage. I mean, people like me that are just now talking heads with small platforms are just sort of trying to bring over more mainstream people that weren't already paying attention, people that are my suburban peers that are sort of been living in a very privileged bubble, and just trying to bring them into greater awareness. And so I think I need to dig out my source list. That's what this makes me think of.
Yeah, I would also say the Gray Zone does great work, which will
Yes,
now
definitely
get canceled immediately. What else?
I always promote those guys. I always will promote Max and Ben and
Yeah.
Aaron and Rania,
Yeah.
or I'm sorry, Anya and
Rania and
Anya.
Anya.
Anya. Well,
Yeah.
yes, but
yes,
Anya Arapel with the Gray Zone.
Yeah,
They do great work, and talk about a story that's been killed. I'm going to call it fact that this so-called chemical attack in Douma, Syria in 2018 was staged by U.S. proxies. They kidnapped civilians, they murdered them, and they tried to say it was Assad. And the OPCW inspectors who blew the whistle have been, talk about whistleblowers being disappeared. This story has not appeared in the New York Times or the Washington Post ever. And even left-ish sites
Democracy
now
Yeah.
ignore it. It should be a huge story.
At the very least, right, to be as conservative and cautious as possible, like if we want to go in that direction, at the very least, there was a cover-up. Regardless of what happened, there was a cover-up. Yeah, there was a cover-up, and they tried to silence a report. They removed people from it. They went to the office. It was like what they did with last time in Iraq, but the same guy, I can't remember his name, Bustelo, right? No.
Bustani.
Bustani, yeah. Bustani,
just interview the whistleblowers.
Yeah, just
One
interview the
of them
whistleblowers.
testified
Exactly.
via video before the UN. I mean, he's not a nobody.
No.
Just report on the story. Just say that these people disagreed and they were shut up. That's all you have. You can put two and two together ourselves, but that's why it's been disappeared, because if you allow this story to get out, it turns into a lie, this 10-year long effort of terror committed against Syria.
Yeah. And again,
we have a request, though. Look at this. We have a request.
Oh.
Look at that.
Greenhouse heat death. I like the name.
It's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea.
But the reading lists are at the end of my books in the bibliography. I don't usually quote, with a few exceptions, books I don't like.
Right. So that's a good point.
I refer to a lot of books within my own books. And that's probably the best way to get a reading list. Yeah.
There you go. Perfect. Yeah. So I just need to write a book and have a lot of good sources.
Right.
We'll do a reading. I'll do a reading of the end of your book, Chris, on another.
Okay. Well, there's 14 of them. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was going to think your latest book. I'll do all of them.
It would be good for insomniacs.
Yeah. And then, okay. Anything else, Jen, before?
Well, I mean, so far we've had at least one person every panel make the call and read the script. Now, obviously, neither of you need a script, but we're asking people to make the call to. It's easier, I think, to call the Department of Justice, just at least for the purposes of on air, because it just goes to a recording and you leave your message versus dealing with the Senate switchboard and getting your representative. But so that's the ask right now is would either of you be willing to make the call on air?
I'll let Margaret do it.
All right. That's it, Margaret. You've just been nominated. All right. I'm going to put it back up.
I nominate Margaret.
What am I calling? Am I calling Merrick Garland?
You're calling the Department of Justice, and here it is. I'm put it up. And you're calling the Department of Justice, and when you get through, you first put it on speakerphone, and then you push the number 1, and that'll take you to where you leave comments regarding civil and constitutional right issues.
Okay, I'm supposed to be calling this number?
Yep, you got to call the Department of Justice comment line.
Uh-huh.
And then when it goes through, you can hit number 1. Just hit 1. It'll skip through their little recording about if you have a real law enforcement problem, call the FBI, which is very helpful of them to tell you to do that.
So, all right. So, okay.
And put it on speaker so we can hear it. Put it on speaker near your mic, and we can hear it.
Let's see.
See, this is why Chris is having you do it.
Yeah.
Because he's sitting there and just sort of mocking you doing this.
No,
right?
I'm not. I'd be much worse.
Okay, here we go.
Record your message at the tone. When you are finished, hang up or press pound for more options.
Hello, my name is Margaret Kimberley. You need to stop prosecuting Julian Assange. This is criminal. You know that the Espionage Act is from 100 years ago. You know it's fascistic. Just leave him alone. You know you're breaking the law. You know you're breaking international law. So I'm asking you actually nicely to stop prosecuting this man. You helped Ecuador violate their own rules in order to snatch this guy. Please stop the extradition. The British even said that American jails are too terrible for someone to be turned over to. So end the persecution of Julian Assange, which started with your predecessors in the Trump administration. Be a real opposition and stop this now. Thank you very much.
You don't want her to ask
need a
not
script.
nicely.
No. Well, she definitely did not need a script. So we don't need to have that going on. No, I didn't think that either of you needed a script. But a lot of people do find it helpful, especially people that aren't used to calling and making commentary to their public officials.
Let's see where I end up now, but that's okay.
Yeah, right.
They already have me on their list.
I was going to say, this is probably a drop in the bucket on your file, Margaret.
That's all right. It's okay. I'm in a lot of trouble already. But
and we know everyone else here has a file.
But I want to say something else about this. I want to, the role of the British in this is just disgraceful, and of Australia, Assange's native country, which has they're puppet states. That's a bigger story. The fact that these allies, these NATO allies, are just puppet states of the U.S. and do whatever the U.S. wants them to do. So Australia won't protect their citizens. Britain breaks their own laws, all in order to do what the U.S. Want them to do. It's very disgraceful.
Yeah.
Someone said that was great. Jocelyn. I don't know who Jocelyn is. Thank you, Jocelyn.
I don't know either. I like to put up the nice ones. I kind of leave the trolly ones just off on the side there.
Well, that's good. Thank you. We don't need any trolling.
No. Some of them are frame-worthy, though. I've gotten some nice ones, that I'm almost like, like you hang your first dollar on the wall behind you. I almost wanted to hang like my first troll comment on the wall behind me. Thank you guys so much for doing this and participating and wrapping up our afternoon, day long Free Assange forum. I'm hoping that we got through to a lot of people and have people calling up, and let's fill the DOJ's message system so that it is completely full and they have to sit there and pick through it and to go through it. So any final words, anything, Katie?
No, I would just give the floor to Margaret and Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. And thank you for encouraging people. I think Assange has been forgotten, even by some of his defenders. And thank you for helping people learn how to seek redress of their grievances and reach out. We're supposed to live in a democracy, right? You're supposed to call your representatives or your Justice Department and tell them what you want. So you guys have done a great service. Thanks.
Yeah, it's all about, as Margaret knows, making them afraid of us. That's our job. And that politics is a game of fear. That's how it works. We wouldn't have gotten the Voting Rights Act under Johnson unless people were in the street. Wouldn't have happened. This is Howard Zinn's brilliance. So all of the openings in American democracy came because people stood up and made their voices heard and didn't compromise on these moral issues. And of course, thousands of Americans in the labor movement, African-American civil rights leaders have paid with their lives throughout American history. And we have to have a kind of fealty to their courage and their integrity going forward, and in particular against the Democratic Party. I mean, I think the bankruptcy of the Democratic Party is emblematic in figures like AOC. Has she ever said a word about Julian Assange? I don't believe she has. Where was she on the $15 minimum wage? Well, she
said she had some concerns.
Okay.
With the $15 minimum wage?
No, about Assange.
Oh, yeah.
About Assange.
Yeah.
Well, we can.
I mean,
resolve
it is up to us, and history has shown that mobilized, organized, and with a clear kind of understanding of where it is we need to go and what is actually the truth. That's the only hope. So, I mean, let's look back to the great radical movements of the past, the socialists, the Black Power movement, the indigenous rights movements around AIM, the great women's movement. All of these movements are what made America better. And let's stop wasting time, rebuild these movements, and fight back.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much.
Sure.
I appreciate you coming on, and this was way fun. And hopefully we'll see you guys again soon.
Great. Thanks for doing it.
Yes,
Next
thank
time
you
you
so
have a
much.
book, Chris, if there's a new book, will you come on my little podcast?
October. I have a book on,
Okay.
I've been teaching in the New Jersey prison system for 10 years, and it's a book on mass incarceration.
That's awesome, because I'm a criminal justice person, and that's that's one of the things we do here is, well, my partner in the community works with incarcerated youth.
Great.
And so if you would come on, that would be amazing.
I'll go
Absolutely. On. Bye, guys.
Okay. Yep.
Thank
bye.
you. Peace
Bye.
out.
Bye,
Okay, bye.
Margaret. Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.